On Christmas Eve, after 27 years of marriage, I came home from a business trip to find the locks changed. On the doorstep sat a cardboard box with my clothes inside, my passport, and a thick envelope. The envelope contained a notice that my house had already been sold 3 weeks ago to a man I had called my closest friend for 20 years. I need to say that again because even now the sentence refuses to behave the way a sentence should. The house I had designed from the foundation up. The house where I carried both my daughters through the front door on the days they were born, had been sold while I was reviewing bridge calculations in a conference room 600 miles away. The transaction completed, filed, and recorded with the county clerk before I landed at Charlotte Douglas International at 4:17 that afternoon. The flight home had been unremarkable. I sat in 14C with my laptop closed and thought about what I would say when I walked in. I had been gone 11 days inspecting a pedestrian bridge retrofit in upstate New York that had gone 3 weeks past deadline. Denise had not answered my last 2 calls. I told myself it was the holiday rush. I told myself she was wrapping gifts or arguing with the oven timer the way she did every Christmas Eve since the year we moved in. I had bought her a bracelet at a jewelry store near the hotel. Silver, simple clasp, the kind she would wear without mentioning. I wrapped it myself at the hotel desk and carried it in my coat pocket through the terminal and up Interstate 77, with the heater running and the radio playing something I have already forgotten. The neighborhood was quiet when I turned onto Birchwood Lane. Christmas lights along every roofline. The Hendersons' inflatable snowman leaning in the wind. Our house, number 41, sat at the end of the cul-de-sac. The porch light was on. The tree I had helped carry inside 2 weeks ago glowed through the front window. White lights. The same strand we had used 9 years running. Everything looked exactly the way it should. That is the detail I returned to most often. The house looked like a place that was waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment the way I always did after a long trip. Then I walked to the front door and put my key in the lock. It did not turn. I tried again, removed the key, examined it, reinserted it. The mechanism did not engage. A new brass cylinder sat where the old one had been, clean and precise, installed by someone who knew what they were doing. I stepped back. That is when I noticed the box. It sat against the brick wall to the left of the welcome mat. A standard moving carton taped shut with clear packing tape. My name on top in black marker. Not Martin. Not Dad. M. Raid. The handwriting was Olivia's. I opened the box on the porch with my car keys. Inside, folded with a neatness that felt deliberate rather than caring. 3 dress shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, my passport in a plastic sleeve, and the blue jacket. The one I had worn to every bridge opening for 14 years. The one Claire used to call my good luck coat when she was small. Folded on top, squared corners, no wrinkles. The way Claire folded things, beneath the jacket, pressed against the bottom, a manila envelope thick enough that it had warped under the weight above it. I opened it standing under the porch light with the Christmas tree glowing behind me through the window. The first document was a real estate transfer notice. 41 Birchwood Lane conveyed to R. Chambers Holdings LLC. Transaction recorded 3 weeks prior. The authorization cited a durable power of attorney signed by Martin J. Reed approximately 3 years earlier. The buyer's registered agent was Richard Chambers, my business partner for 20 years. The man who stood beside me at my daughter's graduation. The man I had recommended for the county planning board. The man whose name I had written on every contract and handshake agreement for 2 decades because I believed that when he said ours, he meant it the way I did. The second document was a petition for dissolution of marriage filed with Mecklenburg County Family Court. Petitioner: Denise Kathleen Reed. Filing date: 11 days ago, the same day I boarded a plane for New York. The third was a financial summary from a commercial lending group I had never heard of. Outstanding balance on a business line of credit registered to Reed Chambers Development LLC, a company I had no knowledge of. $420,000. My name on the guarantor line. my social security number beside it. I called Denise from the driveway. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call, which meant she had been watching through the window, which meant the woman on the other end was standing inside my house, behind my Christmas tree, looking at me. Her voice was level, not angry, not cold, finished. "Martin, you should not have come to the door. The documents explain everything. There is a hotel on Independence Boulevard that takes walk-ins." Olivia's voice came from behind her, close enough to carry through clearly. "It is done, Dad. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I stood in my own driveway holding a phone and a $420,000 debt I had never signed for, looking at a house sold without my knowledge to a man I had trusted without question on Christmas Eve, while every other family on the street was sitting down to dinner. I placed the envelope back in the box on the passenger seat. I sat behind the wheel with both hands on my knees and did not start the engine for 7 minutes. The bracelet was still in my coat pocket. I left it there. At 9:43, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Charlotte area code. 5 words and a single letter. "Dad? Do not go east. I will explain. C." I read it 3 times. I did not know who C was. I did not know why east mattered. But something in the plain certainty of that message, the quiet authority of someone who had thought about what to say before the moment required it, told me that whoever sent it had been preparing for this night longer than I had. I looked at the house one last time. A shadow moved across the living room light. Denise or Olivia, or both, moving through rooms that no longer carried my name on any document that mattered. I started the engine. The hotel on Independence Boulevard had a vacancy sign that buzzed on every third cycle and a parking lot where 3 of the overhead lights had burned out. I did not go inside. I sat in the car with the engine off and the dome light on and the manila envelope open across the steering wheel. And I read every document the way I read engineering plans. Slowly, structurally, looking for the load-bearing elements and the points where the design wanted me to stop paying attention. The power of attorney was on page 4 of the real estate transfer packet. I remembered signing it. 3 years ago, a Tuesday evening in November, Denise had placed it on the kitchen counter beside a stack of insurance renewal forms and a pen. "Just sign these when you get a chance. The insurance company needs updated authorization on file." She said it the way you say something that barely warrants interruption. I signed between bites of leftover pasta without reading past the header. A durable power of attorney grants its holder the legal authority to act on behalf of the signer in all financial, legal, and property matters. It does not expire upon the signer's incapacity. It does not require notification when exercised. It is the most powerful single document a person can sign outside of a will, and I had treated it with less attention than I gave to a restaurant check. Denise had used it to authorize the sale of 41 Birchwood Lane to R. Chambers Holdings, LLC. She had used it to register a new limited liability company, Reed Chambers Development, LLC, with my name and social security number on the operating agreement as co-managing member. She had used it to open a commercial line of credit against that LLC through 3 private lenders I had never contacted, never spoken with, never known existed. 14 drawdowns across 16 months. Each transaction sized just below the threshold that triggered extended review. The total outstanding, $420,000, secured by a personal guarantee that bore my name because the power of attorney made my name hers to use. I set the documents on the passenger seat and picked up my phone. I called David Alderman, our family attorney for 9 years. The man who had drafted our wills, reviewed our home insurance disputes, sat across from us at his conference table and called us by our first names. The line rang 5 times. Then a voice I did not expect. "Mr. Alderman's office is no longer representing you, Martin." Denise's voice. Calm. Prepositioned, as though she had been sitting beside the phone waiting for this specific call. "I recommend you seek independent counsel." The line went dead. I sat with the phone in my hand and let the silence in the car become the only thing I was capable of processing. The attorney I had trusted for 9 years was now on her side of the wall she had built around my life. The accounts I had contributed to for 27 years were inaccessible. The credit cards linked to our joint finances had been frozen or canceled. I already knew this without checking. But I checked anyway, because the engineer in me requires confirmation even when the structure has already visibly failed. The ATM at the gas station 2 blocks from the hotel returned my card with a single word on the screen. Declined. I tried the second card. Declined. I opened my wallet under the gas station canopy light and counted what I had. $340 in mixed bills. The cash I had withdrawn at LaGuardia for taxi fare, I ended up not needing. $340. 27 years of shared finances, 2 decades of contracts and project fees and steady reliable income, and I was standing under a gas station light on Christmas Eve with $340 and a box of clothes packed by my own daughter. I went back to the car. I sat in the parking lot of the hotel I had not checked into, and I did something I had not done since the box appeared on the porch. I looked at the box itself, not the documents inside it. The box. I lifted the clothes out and set them on the back seat. I removed the manila envelope. I ran my hand along the bottom of the carton, feeling for anything pressed flat against the cardboard. My fingers found it in the corner, where the bottom panel met the side wall. A small folded note tucked into the seam of the box where the cardboard overlapped. If I had not been looking, if I had simply dumped the contents and thrown the box away, I would never have found it. Whoever placed it there understood that and placed it anyway. Trusting that the kind of man who reads engineering plans line by line would eventually read a cardboard box the same way. I unfolded it under the dome light. The handwriting was small, neat, unhurried, written by someone who had time to think about every word before committing it to paper. The bridge at Iron Creek. Find what they buried. C. The same letter. The same person who had sent the text message an hour ago telling me not to go east. C had placed this note in the box before the box was placed on the porch, before the locks were changed, before the envelope was sealed. C had known what this night would look like and had prepared for it with the quiet precision of someone who had been watching the machinery assemble itself from the inside. I picked up my phone and typed Iron Creek, West Virginia into the search bar. The map returned a small town in the central Appalachian Highlands, 4 hours and 20 minutes northwest, through the mountains, away from Charlotte, away from Mecklenburg County Family Court, away from Richard Chambers and every person who had decided what I was worth, while I was 600 miles away, looking at a bridge that someone else had built wrong. I looked at the compass on the dashboard. The needle pointed west. West held none of the people who had planned this night. West held a bridge I had never seen in a town I had never heard of, and a note from someone who signed with a single letter and seemed to know more about what was happening to me than I did. I turned the key. I drove northwest on Interstate 77 with both hands on the wheel and the radio off because the silence was more honest than anything else available to me at that hour. Christmas Eve traffic had thinned to almost nothing past Statesville. The highway opened into long, dark stretches between exits, where the only company was the broken center line feeding itself beneath the headlights and the occasional pair of taillights pulling away at a speed that suggested someone else was also trying to put distance between themselves and wherever they had just been. I thought about the first Christmas with Denise, 28 years ago. A studio apartment on Monroe Road with a plastic tree from the drugstore and a string of colored lights that blinked at a rhythm neither of us could fix. She had made spaghetti because neither of us could afford a proper dinner. We ate on the floor because the table was covered with her nursing school textbooks. She laughed at something I said that night, and I remember thinking that I would build the rest of my life around that sound. 27 years later, the same woman had changed the locks and sold the foundation out from under me, while I was checking load tolerances on a bridge 600 miles away. I held the wheel and drove, and did not attempt to reconcile those two facts, because I did not yet have a structure that could hold them both at the same time. I stopped for gas at a station just past the West Virginia line. A single pump operation with a hand-lettered sign and a clerk behind bulletproof glass who did not look up when I came in. I ran my card at the pump. The screen returned the same flat word it had returned in Charlotte. Declined. I paid with cash. $38 for a full tank and a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been made for someone who was not coming back for it. What remained in my wallet was $285. The road climbed as I crossed into the Appalachian Highlands. The interstate gave way to a two-lane state highway that wound along ridgelines and through hollows where the trees grew close enough to the pavement that their branches formed a broken canopy overhead. I could feel the elevation in my ears and in the quality of the air coming through the vents. Something had changed. Not the temperature exactly. The composition. The air at this altitude had a clarity that the air in Charlotte did not. Clean in a way that made me realize I had been breathing something lesser for a very long time, without noticing. Dawn arrived gradually. First as a gray suggestion along the eastern ridge, then as a pale wash of gold that spread across the valley floors and caught the frost on the roadside guardrails. The Blue Ridge Mountains in early morning winter light are not dramatic the way western mountains are. They do not announce themselves. They simply appear, one fold behind another, layered in shades of blue and gray that deepen with distance, until the farthest ridgeline is indistinguishable from the sky. I drove through them slowly, not because the road required it, but because the engineer in me was awake, in the only way it knew how to be. I was reading the bridges, every overpass, every creek crossing, every culvert where a county road met a drainage channel. I read the concrete, the expansion joints, the rebar shadows visible through weathered surfaces. I read the way abutments met the ground, and whether the ground had shifted since the pour. It is the only kind of thinking I can do without having to feel whatever else is happening inside me, and I let it carry me through the last 60 miles. I came into Iron Creek from the south on Route 19 just before 8 in the morning. The town announced itself quietly. A gas station with a hand-painted sign. A hardware store with loading docks open despite the holiday. A diner with a chalkboard daily special propped in the window. One traffic signal cycling green to yellow to red, with no cars waiting in any direction. It was a working town. Not a resort. Not a suburb grafted onto something larger. The buildings along Main Street were old and maintained with the particular attention of people who did not have money to waste, but refused to let things fall apart. I parked along the curb and got out, and stood in the cold morning air, and exhaled slowly for what felt like the first time since the porch. I found the rooming house on Maple Street by chance. A converted Victorian with a wooden placard in the window. Rooms by the week. The woman at the front desk was perhaps 75. Wire-framed glasses, a cardigan buttoned to the throat. She studied me the way you study a structural report that has arrived without a cover letter. Cash, in advance. No noise after 9. Name, Martin. Last name Reed. She wrote it in a ledger without looking up. Room 4. Second floor. Stairs on your left. Her name was Mrs. Hadley. I would learn that later. The room was $40 a night. I placed 2 20s on the counter and told her I would cover the rest of the week within 2 days. She considered this with the unhurried assessment of someone who had seen enough men arrive with insufficient funds to know which ones were problems and which ones were simply between the thing that broke them and the thing that would not. 2 days, she said, and handed me a key, with a brass 4 stamped into it. I dropped my bag in the room and went back outside. The engineering habit I have never been able to disable. Wherever I go, I read structures. I walked Main Street twice, reading window installations, foundation settling, the quality of sidewalk pours. It is how I process a new place. Not with my eyes. With the part of my brain that understands how things are held together and where they are most likely to fail. At the eastern edge of town, where Main Street crossed Iron Creek on a low concrete bridge, I found it. A pedestrian footbridge, spanning the creek 40 yards upstream from the road crossing. Steel and timber construction. Simple span, single arch, handrails of welded tube steel with a slight inward curve at the top that served no structural purpose but made the bridge more comfortable to lean against. I stopped. The design language was specific. The proportions, the way the arch met the abutments, the particular treatment of the connection plates. I had grown up watching someone draw exactly this way. I had sat at a kitchen table as a boy and watched these same decisions being made on paper before they were made in steel. I walked to the center of the bridge and placed my hand on the railing. The steel was cold. I turned my hand underneath the top rail and felt along the lower surface where the tube met the welded bracket. My fingers found the letters before my eyes confirmed them, engraved by hand into the underside of the steel. Small, deliberate, placed where only someone who was looking would ever find them. Gr. 2004. My father disappeared in 2002. He had been here 2 years later, building a bridge that nobody asked him to sign, and signing it anyway. My hand was shaking when I pulled it back. The next morning I was back at the bridge at 6, with 2 cups of coffee from the diner on Main Street. I did not know who the second cup was for. My hands had decided before my head had caught up, and I had carried both cups down the sidewalk and across the road and along the creek path to the footbridge without questioning the arithmetic of a man alone buying 2 of anything. Some decisions you make after careful deliberation. Others, your body makes, because it has recognized something your mind is still 3 steps behind on. I stood at the railing where I had found the initials the day before and watched the creek move beneath the bridge in the low morning light. And I waited for something I could not yet name. The construction site was visible from the bridge. I had noticed it the previous afternoon during my walk, but had not approached it. Now, in the early light, I studied it properly. It sat on a cleared parcel north of Main Street, perhaps 4 acres, surrounded by chain-link fencing with proper posting and permitted signage. Material staging along the western perimeter was organized by build phase, not dumped in delivery sequence. The equipment yard was laid out with the deliberate spacing that prevents bottlenecks during shift transitions. I could read all of that from 60 yards. Someone running this site understood logistics at a level that most contractors never reach. The sign on the fence read, "Reed Mountain Engineering." A foreman in a reflective vest came around from behind the equipment shed and noticed me at the fence line. "Private property, sir. Can I help you?" I told him I was a bridge engineer and that I read job sites the way some people read newspapers. He relaxed slightly. 3 days ahead of schedule, he said. "First time in 4 years we have not had to push a winter pour." He went back around the shed. I stayed at the fence. On the far side of the site, near the northeast corner where the trailer sat on leveled blocks, a man stood apart from the crew. He was not directing work. He was not holding a clipboard or speaking into a radio. He was watching the site operate with the particular stillness of someone for whom oversight is not a task but a condition, the way breathing is a condition. You do not decide to do it. You simply do it because that is what you are. Gray hair under a worn cap. A slight leftward lean in the shoulders. The residual compensation from a lower back injury that never fully resolved. I knew that lean. I had watched it across breakfast tables and at job sites and in the passenger seat of a pickup truck for the first 18 years of my life. He turned slowly, scanning the perimeter the way experienced supervisors do without thinking. A habitual sweep that checks the fence line and the access road and the material staging in one continuous rotation. His eyes passed over me. Continued past. Returned. He was 60 yards away. I could not see the detail of his face at that distance. But I did not need to. I knew the architecture of the way he held his head when he was looking at something that required his full attention. I had inherited it. He began walking toward the fence. Not quickly. The unhurried pace of a man who has spent decades making decisions and learned that the most important ones do not benefit from speed. As he closed the distance, I saw the rest of what I had been waiting to see. The line of his jaw, the particular set of his brow, and then his hands, as he shifted the roll of drawings from his left arm to his right, and his right hand turned outward in the morning light. The scar ran from the base of his thumb across the back of his hand and up the inside of his forearm to just below the elbow. A chemical burn from a job site accident when he was 31 years old. An improperly stored solvent container had ruptured during a foundation pour. 19 stitches. I had been 10 years old. I had stood in the hallway of our house and listened to my mother cry at the kitchen table while the neighbor drove him to the emergency room. He stopped on the other side of the chain link. 12 feet between us. Close enough now that I could see his eyes. And I watched the recognition arrive in them, not as surprise, but as the particular stillness of a man who has imagined a moment so many times in private that when it finally comes, he receives it without movement. I said one word. Not loudly. Barely enough to carry across the space between us. Dad. He stood without moving for 5 seconds. Then he said mine. Not as an echo, as a confirmation. The way you say a word you have been holding in your chest for 24 years and have finally been given permission to release. Martin. He unlatched the gate and led me to the job trailer without ceremony. He pulled 2 folding chairs from behind a drafting table, covered in elevation drawings, and set them facing each other. I handed him the second coffee. He accepted it the way you accept something you did not know you needed. We sat. The trailer smelled like graphite and old paper, and the particular machine oil used on drafting instruments. The sounds of the site came through the thin walls, a diesel engine turning over, the metallic ring of rebar being sorted. He looked at me across the folding table, and I looked at him, and for a long moment neither of us spoke because speaking would have required choosing which of the 24 missing years to begin with. He reached into the chest pocket of his jacket and placed a photograph on the table between us. The color had faded the way photographs from a certain decade fade. The corners were soft from handling. 2 people standing on an unfinished bridge, steel framing visible behind them. The taller one squinting into the sun with a roll of drawings under his arm. The smaller one, 6 years old, wearing a hard hat 3 sizes too large, grinning at something happening beyond the frame. You still have this, I said. Last thing I packed when I left, he said. I needed something to remind me who I was building for. He paused. Then he opened the bottom drawer of the drafting table and removed a rolled set of drawings bound with a leather cord. The paper was heavy, the kind used for formal architectural presentation, not job site reference. The roll was thick enough to represent months of work. I have been drawing something for 24 years, he said. Not a bridge this time. Not a building. He set the roll on the table between us beside the photograph and the 2 coffee cups. Come to the office tomorrow morning. I need to show you what I built instead. We sat in the diner on Main Street the following morning, with 2 cups of coffee and the old photograph between us on the table. The waitress had set the cups down without asking what we wanted. The way a person does when they have seen the same man at the same table, enough mornings to stop treating the order as a question. My father had become a regular in a town I had never heard of until 3 days ago. He had built a life here while I believed he was in the ground. He began without preamble. That was how he had always told difficult things. No preparation. No warning. Just the information, delivered in sequence. With the precision of a man who understood that the structure of a story matters as much as its content. 24 years ago, he said, I was running a joint project with a contractor named Richard Chambers. Mid-size commercial development, east side of Charlotte. The kind of job that requires shared access to the project accounts because materials and subcontractor payments move too fast for a single signature to manage everything. He paused and turned his coffee cup a quarter rotation on the table. I noticed a discrepancy in the disbursement ledger. $70,000 across 3 months, routed to an account that did not correspond to any vendor or subcontractor on the project manifest. I pulled the records. The account belonged to Richard. I confronted him, my father said. I told him I had the documentation and that I intended to report it to the licensing board. He looked at the table when he said the next part. Richard did not argue. He did not deny it. He told me that if I reported anything, he would file a counter-complaint alleging that I had falsified inspection reports on a previous project. A complete fabrication. But the kind of fabrication that triggers an investigation, and investigations take time, and during that time every active contract bearing my name would be frozen, including yours. Mine, I said. You were 32, he said. You had just signed your first independent consulting agreement. 3 bridge inspection contracts with the state. Your name was on all of them. Richard knew that. He told me that if I pushed the issue, he would make sure the counter-complaint named you as a co-respondent. Not because you had done anything, because attaching your name to an active investigation would end your career before it started. My father looked at me across the table. I had 2 choices, he said. Report what I found and watch your career collapse under a fabricated investigation that could take years to resolve, or disappear and let him believe he had won. You left, I said. I left, he said. I removed myself from the project. I closed my accounts. I packed 1 bag and drove west. I did not tell you because I believed that if you knew the real reason, you would have confronted Richard yourself, and he would have followed through on every threat he made. He stopped and looked through the window at Main Street for a moment. The morning light caught the frost on the parked cars along the curb. What about Denise, I said. His expression changed. Not dramatically. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way a structure shifts under load before anyone watching can identify the source of the stress. Denise knew, he said. Not everything, but enough. She knew Richard had threatened me. She knew I was leaving, and she chose not to tell you. I discovered later, years later, that her reasons for keeping quiet were not entirely about protecting you. He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking. I sent you 3 letters in the first 2 years after I left. 1 from Colorado, 1 from Montana, 1 from a town in southern West Virginia. I was passing through on a construction job. I wrote my return address on every envelope. I asked you to write back. I told you I was alive and that I would explain everything when it was safe. I never received them, I said. Not one. I know that now, he said. I have known it for a long time. Denise called me once, after the 3rd letter. She said you had read all 3 and asked her to tell me to stop writing. She said my name was causing problems at home. She said you had moved on. He set the cup down. I believed her, he said, because I did not yet understand that the person controlling the information was also the person who benefited most from controlling it. I sat with that. 3 letters. 3 chances for me to know my father was alive. 3 envelopes that had arrived at my house and been intercepted by a woman who slept beside me every night and said nothing. What did you do after the letters stopped? I said. I built, he said. It is the only response I have ever had to losing something. I find a piece of ground and I put something on it that was not there before. He described the first years. Manual labor on construction crews across 3 states, living on wages, saving in cash, avoiding credit, avoiding any paper trail that connected to his former name or address. He bought his first parcel of land in Iron Creek with cash, because cash required no verification and no history. From that one parcel, he had built outward. 1 contract at a time, 1 bridge at a time, 1 piece of ground at a time. That is the only way I know how to build anything, he said. Slow. From the ground. With your hands on the material. He reached into his jacket and removed a small cardboard box, the kind used for index cards. He placed it on the table and opened the lid. Inside stood on their edges in chronological order 24 birthday cards. Sealed, stamped. Addressed to Martin Reed at 41 Birchwood Lane, Charlotte, North Carolina. Every one of them marked return to sender in red ink that was not my handwriting and was not the handwriting of any postal worker. I sent one every year, he said. Every single one came back unopened. I kept them all. His voice did not break. It simply became very quiet. The way a structure becomes quiet when it has absorbed the maximum load it was designed for and is holding steady. I reached across the table and placed my hand on the box. I did not open any of the cards. I did not need to. The weight of 24 years of reaching out into silence and continuing to reach was sitting in a cardboard box between 2 cups of coffee, and it was heavier than anything I had carried out of Charlotte. How did you know I was in trouble? I said. 6 years ago, he said. I hired a private investigator, not to make contact. I want to be clear about that. Only to watch from a distance. I needed to know you were still standing. The reports were routine for 4 years. Then 2 years ago, the numbers started looking wrong. Financial activity that did not match your income. Transfers through entities that had no business being connected to your name. He paused. And then your daughter found me. Which daughter? I said. Though something in my chest already knew the answer, he looked at me with the steadiness of a man who has been carrying someone else's secret and has been waiting for the right moment to set it down. The one who stayed, he said. My father's office was not what I had expected. After 5 days of gas stations and chain-link fences and a $40 room with a view of a gravel lot, I had been preparing myself for something provisional, the workspace of a man who had not yet committed to permanence. Instead, I found a quiet, grounded room on the second floor of a converted mill building on the north end of Main Street. Project maps covered one full wall. 14 active development files lined the credenza, organized by county and build phase. A corner window gave out across the full length of the valley below, the creek winding through the bottomland, the ridgeline beyond it blue in the winter light. This was not a temporary arrangement. This was the office of a man who had made a decision at some specific unannounced point to stop running and build something that would last whether or not anyone he loved ever walked through the door. A woman was already seated at the conference table when I came in. She stood when my father introduced us. Donna Kessler. Firm handshake. Measured voice. 11 years with Reed Mountain Engineering. Estate planning and fiduciary law. She had one folder open in front of her, and a second heavier stack to her right, still closed. She had the particular composure of attorneys who deal regularly in information that changes the shape of a person's life. Not the composure of good news or bad news, the composure of facts delivered in sequence without editorial. Beside her sat a compact man in a gray sport coat. Alan Pryor, forensic certified public accountant. He placed a bound report in the center of the table and folded his hands on top of it. He had the patient stillness of someone who understood that the numbers he carried were not abstractions. They were the architecture of specific decisions made by specific people, and they would be received as such. My father poured coffee from the credenza and settled across from me. 9 years ago, he said, I made a decision. I did not know whether you would ever find me. I did not know whether I would still be alive if you did. But I knew that whatever I was building here, it needed to outlast the uncertainty. He looked at Donna. She opened the first folder. 9 years ago, she began. At your father's direction, I drafted and registered an irrevocable trust under applicable state law. It is formally titled the Reed Family Legacy Trust. She turned one page. You are named as sole primary beneficiary. George Reed is named as grantor. The trust was funded with 14 real property holdings across 4 states, 3 active mining lease agreements, and a portfolio of operating assets associated with Reed Mountain Engineering and its subsidiaries. She paused in the way attorneys pause when the next number requires its own moment. Current total valuation, $91 million. There is also a liquid reserve of $5.8 million in cash, equivalent instruments held by the independent trustee. I did not speak. $91 million in a trust in the mountains. Built by a man I had believed was dead. Funded with 24 years of work I had never witnessed. Administered by an attorney I had never met. And held in my name since before the first irregular transaction appeared on any financial document connected to my life. Donna continued without inflection. Because the trust was established 9 years prior to any current legal proceeding, it sits entirely outside the scope of any divorce filing, any marital asset calculation, and any creditor claim arising from the LLC structure you have described. It was never marital property. It cannot be reached by discovery, by emergency motion, or by any action currently before the Mecklenburg County Family Court. Including Denise's attorneys, I said. Especially Denise's attorneys. She made a brief notation, and moved to a secondary document. One additional structural item I want to place in your awareness now. Reed Mountain Engineering maintains a licensed subsidiary registered as a mortgage servicer entity under applicable state law. I mention it only so the framework is in place in your understanding when Mr. Pryor presents the specifics of his findings. I looked at my father. You built all of this, without saying a word to me, without knowing whether I would ever stand in this room. He held my eyes for a moment. That is what fathers do, he said. Build something that outlasts the waiting. The sentence landed in a part of my chest I had not accessed in a very long time. I did not have a response adequate to what he had said. I looked at the window instead. At the valley. At the creek. At the ridgeline that had been his horizon for 24 years. While mine had been the Charlotte skyline. And the interior of conference rooms, where I reviewed other people's calculations. Alan Pryor opened his report. He turned to a tabbed section, without preamble. The preliminary forensic analysis of the LLC operating records, he said, covers a 16-month period of financial activity associated with Reed Chambers Development LLC. During that period, 14 individual drawdowns were executed against the commercial line of credit. Each transaction was sized below the threshold that would have triggered extended lender review. The cumulative total is $420,000. He traced the routing path on a printed diagram. The funds passed through 4 layers of Delaware-registered limited liability companies before arriving at their final destination. 2 of those layers are associated through registered agent filings with an individual named Olivia Reed. The 4th layer connects through an operational address to a separate entity whose structural design, the way the Delaware registrations are staggered and cross-referenced, reflects a level of multi-state corporate architecture that Olivia Reed did not construct independently. Richard, I said. Alan looked at me. His attorney's structural fingerprints are demonstrable in the entity design. Direct involvement. I need one additional corroborating piece to state formally, but nothing in this architecture happened without someone possessing his level of knowledge and access. He turned to a flagged page near the back of the report and placed his finger on a highlighted row. There is one additional transaction that falls outside the financial pattern, he said. $215. Debit card registered to Olivia Reed. Recipient. Desert Mountain Clinical Diagnostics. Phoenix, Arizona. Dated approximately 30 months ago. No other personal transaction from this account approaches this amount during the same period. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. Desert Mountain Clinical Diagnostics listed its primary service lines on its registered business description. The first entry was relationship DNA analysis, paternity testing, ancestry verification, biological relationship confirmation. This does not fit the financial pattern, Alan said. He closed the laptop slowly. But it fits a different one entirely. In the weeks that followed, I stopped waiting for the world to reassemble itself into something I recognized and began paying attention to the world that was actually in front of me. My father seemed to understand without saying so directly that the best thing you can offer a man who has just lost everything is something useful to do with his hands and the space to do it without being watched. I went with him to the job sites. There were 14 active projects across 3 counties in varying stages of completion. Foundation pours, steel framing, mechanical rough-in, finishing work. I walked them the way I have always walked job sites. Slowly, reading the angles, thinking about what each structure was being asked to do, and whether the decisions being made at each phase were consistent with what the ground was actually telling the builder. Bridge engineering teaches you one fundamental truth that most people never learn. The structure is not the important part. The structure is the response. The important part is what is underneath it. The soil composition, the water table, the frost line, the way the bedrock angles beneath the surface. Get those wrong, and nothing you build on top will hold, no matter how precisely you calculate the steel. I had spent 27 years reading the surface of my own life and never once checking the ground beneath it. That metaphor was not lost on me during those first weeks in Iron Creek, but I did not dwell on it. I was not yet ready to think in metaphors. I was only ready to think in load calculations and drainage grades and the specific quality of concrete at 7 days versus 28 days cure. On the fourth day, at a commercial development on the eastern edge of the county, I stopped near the southwest corner of the forming area and looked at the grade for a long time. The crew was placing forms for a retaining wall that would channel surface drainage away from the building foundation and toward a collection basin 40 yards downslope. My father came up behind me. "You have been looking at that corner for 10 minutes, he said. "The drainage slope runs the wrong direction," I said. "Not enough to show in a dry season. But the first significant rain, you will have standing water against that foundation for 48 hours minimum. The water has nowhere to go. It will pool against the footing and start working into the joint between the slab and the stem wall. 2 winters of that, and you will have cracking. 4 winters, and you will have structural compromise." He looked at the corner. Then he called the site foreman over and had me explain it again. I drew the correct grade on a piece of scrap paper and marked the elevation differential. The foreman studied it, looked at the ground, looked at the forms, and nodded once. By the following morning, the grade had been corrected. That was the conversation that settled the question of what I was going to do while I was in Iron Creek. "You keep looking at the structure," my father said on the walk back to the truck. "Habit I cannot turn off," I said. He opened the driver's side door and paused with one hand on the frame. "Structure is what someone else already decided," he said. "The ground underneath is what you are actually responsible for." I thought about that sentence for the rest of the afternoon and for most of the evenings that followed. It was not advice. It was a diagnosis. The following week, he placed a document on the conference table in his office. A consulting agreement, 1-page, simple terms. A day rate that was modest enough to feel honest and specific enough to constitute real employment. I was not a partner. I was not on the board. I was a man with 35 years of bridge and civil engineering experience who currently had nowhere pressing to be and no remaining obligations to anyone who had previously defined the shape of his days. That turned out to be worth something to a company with 14 active sites and a founder who had been running operations without a second engineering opinion for over 2 decades. I signed it at the conference table with a pen that my father handed me without ceremony. It was the first document I had signed since the power of attorney 3 years earlier. I read every line. I moved out of room 4 at Mrs. Hadley's rooming house and into a short-term rental cabin on the western slope above town. 2 rooms, a functional kitchen, a wood stove that required attention every 3 hours, but which I discovered I did not mind tending. The rhythm of feeding a fire through the night has a quality that I had not anticipated. It requires you to wake at intervals, to check, to adjust, to make small decisions in the dark about airflow and fuel. It is a form of responsibility that asks nothing of you except presence. I bought groceries at the general store on the south end of Main Street. I cooked for myself for the first time in 27 years. Simple things. Eggs, rice, whatever vegetables looked reasonable. I ate at the kitchen table, with the window open to the cold mountain air and the sound of the creek somewhere below in the dark. I woke before dawn most mornings. I drove to whichever site needed eyes that day. I carried a thermos and a rolled set of the project drawings, and I walked the work with the particular attention of someone who has recently learned that the things you assume are solid beneath you may not be, and that the only honest response is to check. I did not think further ahead than the following week. The following week was as far as I could see clearly enough to be of use, and I had decided somewhere in the first 10 days that being of use was the only form of recovery available to me. Not healing, not resolution, not understanding. Just the plain ordinary act of showing up at a job site with knowledge that someone needed and providing it without being asked to explain where I had been or what had brought me here. The crew stopped treating me as a visitor after the drainage correction. They began leaving questions at the trailer in the morning, scrawled on notepads or marked on drawings with pencil circles and question marks. I answered them. That was enough. There is a window in the night, somewhere between 11 and 2, when the defenses a man builds during the daylight hours quietly stop working. He is too tired to maintain them and not yet tired enough to sleep. The walls come down without announcement, and whatever he has been keeping at a functional distance during the hours when there are things to do and structures to inspect and questions to answer, moves back in and sits down beside him and will not be reasoned with. In Iron Creek, that window found me in the 6th week on a Tuesday night in the middle of February. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in the cabin with the wood stove ticking as the last log settled into coals and my phone opened to the contacts list, and 27 years of ordinary mornings moving through my mind without my permission. I had been scrolling without a destination. That is always the first sign. When a man scrolls through a contacts list at midnight without a specific name in mind, he is usually already looking for one name and unwilling to admit it. I stopped at the D section. Denise's contact photograph was 5 years old. A family dinner, early spring. The light coming through the window at an angle that suited her. She was laughing at something Olivia had said. She looked exactly like the version of herself I had spent 27 years building a life around. The version that had been entirely real to me until the moment I understood it had been something else as well. I thought about specific things. The way she brought coffee to my desk on Sunday mornings without being asked, setting the cup on the corner where the steam would rise past my peripheral vision and remind me she was somewhere in the house. The way she held my hand on airplanes, not anxiously, firmly, her thumb pressing the back of my knuckles every time we hit turbulence. A quiet signal that she was still there. The particular sound of her footsteps on hardwood floors, distinguishable from every other footstep I had ever heard in that house. 27 years of small accumulated things, none of which had been erased by the cardboard box on the porch. You cannot delete what has been lived. It happened. It was real. The fact that she had also been someone else operating inside the life we shared does not unmake 27 years of Sunday coffee. Both things are true at the same time. That is the part no one tells you how to carry. My thumb rested above her name on the screen. One tap and the phone would ring in a house that was no longer mine. In a city I had left in the dark 6 weeks ago, and the woman who answered would hear my voice, and I would hear hers. And whatever equilibrium I had been constructing, one drainage grate and one wood stove log at a time, would come apart in the space between one breath and the next. There was a soft knock on the cabin door. Not urgent. The knock of someone who had noticed a light on and was not alarmed by it, but was not willing to ignore it either. My father opened the door and took in the room in one quiet look. The phone in my hand. The glow of the screen. The expression on my face, which I imagine was the expression of a man caught in the middle of doing something he knows is not in his own interest and has not yet found the strength to stop. He came in without asking, pulled the single chair from the corner and set it beside the bed. He sat down. He reached over and lifted the phone gently from my hand, turned it face down on the nightstand, and leaned back in the chair. We sat in silence for what might have been 10 minutes. He did not attempt to organize it. He did not offer perspective or advice or any of the things that people offer when they are uncomfortable with another person's pain and want it to resolve itself on a schedule. I called her once, he said eventually. 7 years after I left. The woman I had been building a life with before everything happened. He looked at the wall, rather than at me. She was doing fine. A garden. A dog. 2 states away. Everything that had been good between us, I had been carrying it around for 7 years, keeping it in good condition, polishing it, making sure it stayed exactly the way I remembered. He paused, made one phone call and spent it all in 40 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. That phone is not going anywhere, he said. You are saying I am not ready. I said, I am saying the phone will still be there tomorrow. And tomorrow you will be stronger than you are right now. He looked at me. Tonight you are not strong enough to hear her voice and still be the man you were this morning at the job site. That is not a judgment. That is engineering. At 11:40 my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I reached for it. My father did not stop me. He knew the difference between the call I had been about to make and whatever had just arrived. Unknown number. Charlotte area code. A text message. Dad, I have 9 months of what they do not know I have. I cannot say it in a text. Meet me halfway. Cedar Ridge Diner. Route 19. Saturday. I read it twice and showed it to my father. She found me 2 years ago, he said, through a bridge permit filing with the State Transportation Archive. A design I had signed in 2004. She sent a registered letter to the office. I called her within a week. I told her to stay inside. Stay invisible. Do not change anything that would alert them to what she was doing. She followed every instruction. How long has she been collecting? I said. 9 months, he said. She has been their shadow for 9 months. I typed one word into the reply field. Saturday. Before I sent it, I scrolled up and read the first message again. The one from Christmas Eve. Dad, do not go east. I had read those 5 words that night as a warning. Abstract advice from someone who understood more than she had written. But sitting in the dark of a mountain cabin, 6 weeks later, I read them differently. Not a warning. A directive. The language of someone who had already mapped the terrain, identified the exits, and decided which direction her father needed to move before he had understood that he was moving at all. I sent the message. I set the phone on the nightstand with the screen facing down. My father stood and moved to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. She packed the blue jacket for you, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. He gave a single nod. Then she had been waiting for this, longer than either of us knew. He closed the door behind him, with a care that matched everything else about the way he moved through the world. Quietly, deliberately, as though every action was a joint he was setting, and he intended it to hold. Saturday morning came with a sky so pale, it looked like someone had washed it with soap and forgotten to rinse. I drove the 40 minutes south on Route 19 with the windows cracked, letting the February air push against my face the way cold water pushes against a man who has been sleeping too long. Cedar Ridge Diner sat at the elbow of 2 county roads, a narrow building with aluminum siding and a red roof that had faded to the color of dried clay. I arrived at 8:40. The parking lot held 3 trucks and a station wagon with out-of-state plates. Virginia. I noted the plate number without thinking. 27 years of inspecting details does not switch off because a man changes his zip code. Inside, the diner smelled like bacon grease and fresh coffee. A counter ran the length of the left wall, 6 stools occupied by men in work jackets who did not look up. I chose the booth in the far corner, back to the wall, facing the door. An engineer picks the seat with the widest sight line. It is not paranoia. It is load distribution for the nervous system. I ordered black coffee and a glass of water. The waitress called me honey and set down a laminated menu I did not open. I checked my phone. No new messages. The screen still showed the last text from the unknown number. Saturday. Route 19. 9 months. At 8:53, the front door opened and a woman stepped in carrying a canvas messenger bag over her left shoulder. She was 31, medium height, dark brown hair pulled into a low knot, and she wore a blue denim jacket with a small enamel pin on the collar. A camera. I did not need a DNA test to know who she was. She had my mother's jawline, the same narrow bridge of the nose, and when she scanned the room, her eyes moved left to right the way mine do. Structural sweep. Check the corners first, then the exits. She saw me. She did not wave. She did not smile. She walked straight to the booth, set the bag on the vinyl seat, and sat across from me. For 6 seconds, neither of us spoke. The coffee between us sent a thin line of steam toward the ceiling. "You look like the photograph," she said. Her voice was steady, the accent faintly mid-Atlantic, the kind that forms when someone grows up in one state and studies in another. Grandpa showed me the one with the hard hat. I nodded. My throat had closed the way a valve shuts when pressure exceeds the rated limit. I had not heard anyone call George Grandpa before. Claire, I said. Claire Elise Reed, she said, as though confirming a reservation. Freelance photographer. Based in Richmond until 11 months ago. Based nowhere in particular since then. She unzipped the messenger bag and placed 3 items on the table in a row. A black USB flash drive, a micro SD card in a small plastic case, and a spiral-bound notebook with a green cover. She arranged them parallel to each other. Edges aligned. The way someone arranges instruments before a procedure. 9 months, she said. I started in May. At first I was only trying to understand the money. Then I realized the money was just the surface. She opened the notebook to the first page. A timeline written in neat block letters ran down the left margin. Dates, locations, initials. The first entry read, May 14th, RC, meets DR. Chambers office, 11:15 a.m. 42 minutes. R.C. was Richard Chambers. DR. was Denise Reed. 214 photographs, Claire said, turning pages slowly. 11 audio recordings. 4 of them are phone conversations I captured through a parabolic microphone from a parked car. The other 7 are in-person meetings recorded with a lapel device smaller than a button. I looked at the photographs taped to the notebook pages. Richard and Denise at a restaurant I did not recognize. Richard signing papers in what appeared to be a law office. Olivia handing an envelope to a man in a parking garage, the man's face partially visible but his briefcase clearly marked with a firm logo. A bank lobby. A notary's desk. A FedEx counter. With a package addressed to a Delaware post office box. How did you find them? I asked. I found Grandpa first, Claire said. She closed the notebook and placed both palms flat on the table. 2 years ago, I was researching a photo essay on historic bridges in Appalachia. I pulled county permits in Fayette County and found a signature. George Allen Reed. The permit was dated 2004. I cross-referenced the name, found the company, drove to Iron Creek, and knocked on his trailer door. She paused. The waitress refilled my coffee. Claire ordered nothing. He told me the whole story in one afternoon, she continued. The theft, the threat, the letters Denise intercepted. He asked me not to contact you yet. He said the structure was not ready. I did not understand what he meant until I started looking at the financial records. She tapped the USB drive. This contains 312 files. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, LLC formation documents, property transfer records. I obtained them through public records requests, court filings, and 2 sources inside the Chambers organization who believed they were helping a journalist. Are they admissible? I said. Donna Kessler reviewed the chain of custody last month, Claire said. 11 of the recordings meet single-party consent standards under West Virginia and North Carolina law. The photographs are time-stamped with GPS metadata. The financial documents are certified copies. I stared at the 3 items on the table. A flash drive, a memory card, and a notebook. Together they weighed less than a pound. Together they contained the skeleton of 27 years of lies arranged in chronological order, labeled, and cross-referenced. Why did you wait 9 months? I said. Claire looked at me for the first time without the professional steadiness. Something shifted behind her eyes. A tremor in the foundation that she controlled before it reached the surface. Because I wanted to be sure, she said. And because I wanted you to be standing on solid ground when you saw it. She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine for exactly 2 seconds, then pulled back. The warmth stayed longer than the touch. There is one more thing, she said. She pulled the SD card from its case and held it between her thumb and index finger. Recording number 11. Denise and Richard. Recorded October 9th, 8:14 p.m. in the kitchen of 41 Birchwood Lane. They discussed the power of attorney, the debt distribution, and the reason Olivia's DNA test was ordered from a lab in Phoenix instead of Charlotte. She set the card on the table beside my coffee. You are going to want to hear that one last. We drove back to Iron Creek in separate vehicles. Claire followed my truck in her station wagon with the Virginia plates, maintaining a steady 3-car lengths the entire 40 minutes. I watched her in the mirror. She signaled every turn before I did, as though she had memorized the route months ago. She probably had. George was waiting on the second floor of the mill office. He had cleared the long table in the center of the room and set out 4 chairs, a laptop, a portable speaker the size of a paperback book, and a pot of coffee that looked like it had been made an hour earlier. Donna Kessler sat in the chair nearest the window, a legal pad already half covered in handwriting. Alan Pryor stood by the whiteboard with a red marker in his hand and 3 columns drawn in clean vertical lines. The columns were labeled income, transfer, and destination. Claire placed the SD card on the table and sat beside me. George lowered himself into the chair across from us, folded his hands, and said nothing. The room held 6 people counting the silence, which took up more space than any of us. Recording 11, Claire said. She inserted the card into the laptop, opened a folder, and double-clicked the file. The metadata showed October 9th, 8:14 p.m., duration 19 minutes and 43 seconds. Location tagged to 41 Birchwood Lane, Charlotte, North Carolina. My kitchen. The kitchen where I had cooked breakfast every Sunday for 27 years. Claire pressed play. The first sound was a cabinet door closing, then ice cubes dropping into glass, then Denise's voice, closer to the microphone than Richard's, which meant she was standing near the counter and he was at the table. I knew the acoustics of that room the way I know the resonance frequency of a concrete span. Every surface had a sound. The cabinet was the one above the stove. The glass was one of the heavy tumblers we received as a wedding gift. The power of attorney covers everything through the end of the fiscal year, Denise said. Her voice was calm, operational. The tone she used when she organized school fundraisers or scheduled contractor visits. David confirmed it last week. Martin will not see the drawdowns until February at the earliest, and by then the LLC will have distributed. And the house, Richard said, signed. The title transfers on the 1st. I backdated the notarization to November to match the refinance window. There was a pause. A chair scraped. Richard's voice moved closer. What about the girl, he said. Olivia is fine, Denise said. She understands the structure. She knows her role in the holding company, and she knows the payout schedule. That is not what I am asking, Richard said. The ice cubes shifted in the glass. The lab in Phoenix. Why did she go to Phoenix? A longer pause. 4 seconds. I counted them the way I count load intervals on a stress test. Because she wanted to know, Denise said. She has suspected since she was 19. The resemblance is not subtle, Richard. She has your hands, your forehead. She went to Desert Mountain Clinical Diagnostics in June. She paid $215 on her personal card. The results confirmed what she already believed. Does Martin know? Richard said. Martin does not know anything, Denise said. Martin has not known anything for 27 years. Claire pressed pause. The room was quiet. I became aware that my hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, pressing down as though the surface might tilt. An engineer presses down when the structure shakes. It is instinct, not thought. There is a certified copy of the lab report, Claire said. She opened the notebook to a tabbed page and slid it across the table. A single sheet from Desert Mountain Clinical Diagnostics, Phoenix, Arizona. Patient Name Olivia Denise Reid. Test type paternity confirmation. Buccal swab. Reference sample obtained from a drinking glass. Chain of custody. Documented by a licensed technician. The result line read, probability of paternity, 99.97%. The alleged father field read Richard Allen Chambers. I read the number 3 times. 99.97. In engineering, that margin eliminates doubt. It is the kind of number that closes a case file and opens a different one. 27 years. Every birthday party. Every school play. Every argument about curfew and grades and the cost of her first car. Every time Olivia called me Dad, and I answered without hesitation. The word had been structurally intact, but the foundation beneath it had been hollow since the day she was born. "Martin," George said. His voice came from across the table like a hand placed on a railing. Steady. Not pulling. Just present. I nodded. I did not trust my voice yet. Alan Pryor stepped to the whiteboard and uncapped the red marker. "I need to show you one more thing before we stop for the day," he said. He wrote a number in the transfer column. $1.4 million. Beside it, he wrote Blue Ridge Land Partners, LLC. And beneath that, a date range covering 18 months. This entity appears in 3 of the shell company layers we traced from the $420,000 debt, Alan said. But it also appears in a separate transaction stream that has nothing to do with you, Martin. Richard Chambers used Blue Ridge Land Partners to purchase 72 acres of undeveloped land in McDowell County. The purchase price was $1.4 million. The funds were routed through a Cayman Islands intermediary. None of this income was reported on his federal or state returns for the relevant tax years. He circled the number and drew an arrow to the destination column, where he wrote 2 letters. I-R-S, tax fraud, Donna said from the window seat, not looking up from her legal pad. Federal, minimum 5 years if convicted. And the undeclared foreign intermediary adds a second count. Alan set the marker down. The $420,000 debt they pinned on you is a footnote compared to what Richard built for himself. He was not just stealing from you, Martin. He was stealing from the government at the same time, and using your name as the foundation. Claire closed the laptop. The recording was paused at 11 minutes and 8 seconds. There were still 8 minutes and 35 seconds remaining. I looked at the screen, at the frozen waveform, at the time code that held the rest of whatever Denise and Richard said in my kitchen on an October evening while I was 3 states away, inspecting a drainage system I no longer owned. "What about the first 15 years?" I said. The room went still. Alan looked at Donna. Donna looked at George. George looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not sadness. Not anger. Something closer to the look a man gives a bridge he knows must be tested to failure before it can be certified to carry weight. "That," George said quietly, "is what the rest of the recordings will tell us." The following Tuesday, I sat on the cabin porch at 5 in the morning with a mug of coffee going cold in my hands. The valley below was filled with fog so thick it erased the tree line. From where I sat, the world ended about 40 feet past the railing. Everything beyond that point was theory. I had not slept more than 3 hours in 4 nights. The recording played on a loop in my head. Not the words. The tone. Denise's voice arranging the destruction of my life, with the same inflection she used to schedule a dentist appointment. Richard asking about the girl the way a project manager asks about a line item. Olivia reduced to a role in a holding company, her entire childhood reframed as a staffing decision made before she could walk. I had built structures for 27 years. Bridges that carried school buses and ambulances and families driving home on Friday evenings. I understood load and stress and the exact moment when a material transitions from elastic deformation to permanent failure. I was somewhere near that line now. The question was which direction I would move. At 6:15, George's truck appeared on the gravel road below, headlights cutting 2 pale tunnels through the fog. He parked, climbed the porch steps, and sat in the other chair without speaking. He carried a thermos and 2 paper cups. He poured for both of us. The coffee was hot and strong and tasted like the kind a man makes when he has been awake since 4. "I want to give you 3 reasons," George said. He held his cup with both hands the way a man holds something he does not want to drop. 3 reasons to stay and finish what Claire started. After that, if you want to drive back to Charlotte and file a quiet divorce and walk away, I will hand you the keys to any property in the trust and never mention Richard Chambers again. I looked at the fog. It had begun to thin at the edges, revealing the dark shape of ridgelines I had memorized over the past weeks. "Reason 1, George said. The debt. $420,000 in your name, attached to an LLC you did not authorize, secured by assets you did not pledge. If you walk away, that number follows you. It attaches to your credit, your future earnings, your ability to bid on any contract in any state. Donna filed the purchase papers yesterday. Purchase papers, I said. The trust acquired the full balance of the $420,000 obligation from the original lender at 87 cents on the dollar. $365,400. The debt still exists, Martin, but the trust now holds it. You owe the money to yourself. I set the coffee down. The arithmetic arrived before the emotion. 87 cents on the dollar meant someone had negotiated a discount, which meant the lender considered the debt at risk of default, which meant Richard's structure was already showing cracks in the market. Donna had seen the crack and stepped into it. She also initiated acquisition of the mortgage service contract on 41 Birchwood Lane. George continued. The house Richard purchased from Denise using your forged power of attorney. When the trust controls the mortgage servicer, we control the payment terms. If Richard misses a single installment, the trust can initiate foreclosure proceedings on the house he stole from you. I stared at him. The engineering was precise. Every element load-bearing, every connection bolted, every redundancy accounted for. Donna had not just neutralized the debt, she had turned it into a lever. Reason 2, George said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased at the corners, printed on the kind of paper they used 20 years ago. The image showed a man in his early 30s kneeling beside a girl of about 4 on a construction site. The man wore a hard hat and a reflective vest. The girl wore rain boots 3 sizes too large and held a dandelion in her left hand. The man was me. The girl was Claire. I had forgotten that photograph existed. It was taken on the Millbrook Overpass project. A Saturday morning when Denise had dropped Claire off because the babysitter canceled. Claire had spent 3 hours on that site, asking the foreman what every machine did, picking dandelions from the mud beside the temporary fence. I carried her on my shoulders back to the truck when she fell asleep at noon. She kept the boots, George said. They are in her car. She told me she has moved them to 6 different apartments in 9 years. I picked up the photograph. The edges were soft from handling. Someone had looked at this image many times. Someone had held it the way I was holding it now, with the thumb pressed flat against the margin to keep the center from curling. Reason 3, George said. He leaned forward. The fog behind him had lifted enough to reveal the first line of trees, dark green against the gray morning. You are the only licensed structural engineer in this family. Claire has the evidence. Donna has the legal framework. Alan has the numbers. I have the resources. But none of us can read a structure the way you can. None of us can stand in front of 450 people and dismantle a building in real time so that everyone in the room understands exactly how it was built, exactly where it failed, and exactly who poured the faulty concrete. He finished his coffee and set the cup on the railing. You are not the victim in this story, Martin. You are the inspector. And the inspection is not finished. The fog cleared another 30 feet. I could see the creek now, a silver line moving through the valley floor. Somewhere downstream, it passed beneath the footbridge, where my father had carved his initials 22 years ago. The same creek, the same valley, the same man sitting across from me, who had waited 2 decades for this conversation. I picked up my coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. Tell Donna I need the full servicer file by Thursday, I said. And tell Claire to bring every recording. Not just 11. All of them. George nodded once. He did not smile. He stood, placed one hand on my shoulder for 3 seconds, and walked back to his truck. The engine started. The headlights swept across the gravel. The fog parted and closed behind him like a curtain. I sat on the porch until the valley was fully visible. Every ridge, every tree line, every bend in the road. The structure was clear. The inspection had begun. The plan took 5 months to build. I know this because I counted every week the way I count curing days on a concrete pour. You do not rush the chemistry. You control the temperature, monitor the moisture, and wait for the material to reach its rated strength before you apply the load. We applied no load until July. In the first week of March, Donna Kessler filed a formal referral with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, attaching Alan Pryor's forensic report, the shell company mapping, and certified bank records showing $1.4 million routed through a Cayman Islands intermediary to Blue Ridge Land Partners, LLC. The filing named Richard Allen Chambers as the primary subject. 5 days later, she filed a parallel referral with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit in Charleston, citing wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit tax evasion. Both agencies confirmed receipt. Neither agency contacted Richard. They won't move until they have enough to indict, Donna said during our Thursday meeting in the mill office. That gives us time. We build our event. They build their case. The timelines converge on the same evening. By mid-March, the team had grown to 6. George handled logistics and property. Donna managed legal architecture. Alan continued tracing financial threads, eventually identifying 23 separate transactions across 7 entities spanning 6 years. Claire organized the evidence library, converting every photograph, recording, and document into a digital archive with redundant backups stored in 3 locations. I reviewed every piece through the lens of structural sequence. Which fact supported which fact? Which beam carried which load? Which connection, if removed, would cause the entire framework to collapse? The 6th member arrived on March 19th. Jack Mercer, 61, retired United States Marshal Service, now running a private security consultancy out of Lewisburg. George had retained him 4 years earlier for property protection. Jack was 6 feet 2. Gray-haired, quiet in the way that large men are quiet when they have spent 30 years in rooms where silence meant survival. He shook my hand once, sat down, read the entire case file in 2 hours, and said 4 words. I need floor plans. Jack's role was operational security for the event we had not yet named. He would manage entry control, camera placement, and contingency extraction. He asked no questions about motive. He asked 17 questions about door widths, ceiling heights, electrical panel locations, and the distance from the main stage to the nearest emergency exit. I answered all 17 from memory. He looked at me and nodded, and I understood that we spoke the same language. The event took shape through April. Donna proposed hosting it as the public launch of Reed Mountain Engineering's newest project, a pedestrian bridge in Riverside Park in Fayette County. The project was real. George had approved the funding in January. The launch provided a legitimate reason to invite 450 guests, including county officials, project investors, construction partners, media, and 3 specific individuals who would receive their invitations by a different method. 3 envelopes. I built them myself at the cabin table on a Sunday afternoon in April, while rain tapped against the tin roof. Each envelope was heavy cream stock, hand-addressed in black ink, sealed with a wax stamp, bearing the Reed Mountain Engineering logo. Inside each was a single card printed on linen paper. The first envelope was addressed to Olivia Denise Reed, apartment 412, the Metropolitan, Charlotte, North Carolina. The card inside read, "You are invited to a private reception celebrating the legacy of the Reed family. July 19th, 7 p.m. Iron Creek, West Virginia. A car will be provided." Below the text, in smaller type, "A trust distribution matter requires your signature in person." The second envelope was addressed to Denise Kathleen Reed, 41 Birchwood Lane, Charlotte, North Carolina. The same card, the same date, the same car offer. The smaller text read, "A mortgage service transfer requires acknowledgement by the registered occupant." The third envelope was addressed to Richard Allen Chambers, Chambers and Associates, Suite 900, 1 Independence Center, Charlotte, North Carolina. Same card, same date. The smaller text read, "Each envelope contained a reason its recipient could not ignore. Olivia would come for the money. Denise would come because the mortgage now belonged to someone else and she needed to know who. Richard would come because he had never turned down a deal in his life, and because the word significant was the frequency at which his greed resonated." Donna reviewed the language for legal exposure. Claire photographed each envelope before sealing. Alan confirmed that none of the text contained any statement that could be construed as fraudulent inducement. The invitations were truthful. There was a trust matter. There was a mortgage transfer. There was a proposal of significant value. The recipients would simply discover that the value was not the kind they expected. The envelopes were mailed on May 1st. Standard post. No tracking. No urgency. They would arrive like any other piece of mail, settle into a stack on a counter or a desk, and wait to be opened with a thumb and a paper knife. By the time each recipient read the card, the concrete would already be cured and the rebar would already be set. The structure would be waiting for them. On the last Saturday of June, 3 weeks before the event, George lit a charcoal grill behind the mill office. Claire brought potato salad from the diner. Jack brought a 6-pack of root beer, which he explained was the only beverage he had consumed since 1994. Alan brought nothing and apologized twice. Donna brought a folder of final documents, set it on a picnic table, and did not open it until after dessert. We sat in folding chairs on the grass beside the creek. The evening was warm. Fireflies moved through the tree line in slow, random patterns, each one a small signal with no fixed destination. Claire sat beside me. At one point she leaned her shoulder against mine for a few seconds, then straightened and continued eating. George watched from across the circle and said nothing, but I saw him close his eyes briefly, the way a man does when something he has waited a long time to see finally appears. No one mentioned the envelopes. No one mentioned Richard or Denise or Olivia. For 2 hours, 6 people sat beside a creek in West Virginia and talked about weather, baseball, the price of lumber, and whether Alan's truck would survive another winter. It was the first evening in months that felt like it had no weight. At 9 o'clock, as the fireflies thickened and the creek turned black, Donna opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet. The guest list. 453 names, 3 of them circled in red. 3 weeks, she said. I looked at the creek. Somewhere beneath the surface, the current was doing what currents do, moving everything downstream, whether the things being carried wanted to go or not. July 19th, 5:30 in the afternoon. The sky above Fayette County held the kind of light that arrives in the last 2 hours before a summer storm. Everything gold on one side, everything iron on the other. The air carried the smell of warm grass and river stone, and the faint electrical charge that makes the hair on your forearms stand without explanation. The venue was the east bank of the New River, a quarter-mile downstream from the Iron Creek footbridge. George had selected the site 18 months earlier for the pedestrian bridge and Riverside Park project. The park was still in its grading phase, raw earth shaped into terraces and walking paths that would not receive their final surface for another 4 months. But the temporary event structure was complete. A white open-sided tent, 120 feet by 80 feet, anchored with steel ground stakes rated for 40-mile-per-hour wind. Inside, 453 chairs arranged in curved rows facing a raised platform at the northern end. The platform was 12 feet wide, 8 feet deep, constructed from scaffolding and plywood, and draped in dark gray fabric. On the platform sat a single podium, a wireless microphone, and a cardboard box. The box was the same size and color as the one I had found on my doorstep 7 months ago. I had asked Jack to source it from the same manufacturer. Same corrugated weight. Same brown finish. Same folding lid. It sat on a small table to the right of the podium, closed, unremarkable, visible to everyone, and interesting to no one. For now, behind the platform, concealed by the gray draping, Jack's team had installed four 75-inch commercial displays mounted on rolling stands. Each screen was connected to a dedicated laptop. Each laptop contained a specific folder. Screen 1 held financial documents. Screen 2 held photographs. Screen 3 held the DNA report. Screen 4 held the trust documents and the IRS referral confirmation. At 8 o'clock, the screens would roll forward. At 8 o'clock, the gray curtain would open. But at 5:30, the curtain was closed and the screens were dark, and the box was just a box. I stood at the tree line 50 yards east of the tent and watched the setup crew finish their work. Electricians tested the speaker system. Catering staff arranged tables along the south wall. A florist positioned arrangements of native wildflowers, black-eyed Susans and mountain laurel, in galvanized buckets at the end of each row. The details were Claire's. She had designed the visual program for the evening with the same precision she applied to her photography. Every sight line calculated, every focal point deliberate. Jack appeared beside me. He wore a dark suit with no tie and an earpiece connected to a frequency shared by four members of his team positioned at the entrance, the parking area, the backstage corridor, and the river path. "Perimeter is set," he said. 2 cameras on the entrance, 1 on the VIP staging room, 2 inside the tent covering the platform in the center aisle. Audio is live on all channels. The 3 targets have confirmed attendance through their respective administrative contacts. "What time?" I said. Chambers confirmed for 7:15. Denise confirmed for 7. Olivia confirmed for 6:45. She is arriving early. Probably wants to assess the room before her mother gets here. I nodded. Olivia had always arrived early. School events, family dinners, holiday gatherings. She surveyed rooms before she entered them. I used to think she inherited that from me. Now I understood she inherited it from the man who taught her that every room is a transaction. At 6 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. County commissioners, local business owners, construction partners, 2 reporters from the Fayette Tribune, a camera crew from a Charleston television station that George had quietly invited through a third party. They parked in the gravel lot at the top of the hill and walked down the lit path to the tent entrance, where Jack's team checked names against the master list and handed each guest a program. The program listed the evening schedule. Welcome remarks at 7:30. Project presentation at 7:45. Special address at 8 o'clock. Reception to follow. The program did not mention screens or recordings or a cardboard box. At 6:42, a black sedan pulled into the lot. Olivia stepped out. She wore a cream-colored dress and heels that were wrong for gravel, but right for a room she intended to command. She walked the path with her chin lifted, scanning left and right, and paused at the entrance for 4 seconds before stepping inside. Jack's voice came through the earpiece he had given me. Target 1, seated, row 7, aisle seat. At 6:58, a second car arrived. Silver. Denise emerged from the passenger side. A driver I did not recognize held the door. She wore black, which she always wore to events she considered serious. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. She walked slowly, as though the path required consideration, and entered the tent without looking at anyone. Target 2, seated, row 12, center. At 7:11, a dark blue SUV parked at the far end of the lot, away from the other vehicles. Richard Chambers stepped out alone. He adjusted his jacket, checked his phone, and stood beside the vehicle for nearly a full minute. He was reading the room from the parking lot, measuring the crowd, calculating his entrance. He walked the path with the stride of a man who believed the evening belonged to him. Target 3, seated, row 3, aisle seat. He chose the front. Of course he did. Richard always sat in the front. A man who steals from his partner for 20 years does not sit in the back. He sits where everyone can see him, because visibility is the costume that confidence wears when guilt is underneath. At 7:20, Claire emerged from the backstage corridor. She wore the blue denim jacket with the camera pin on the collar. The same jacket she had worn at Cedar Ridge Diner 5 months ago. She carried a small leather portfolio and a wireless remote no larger than a car key. She looked at me across the tent. I looked at her. Neither of us nodded. Neither of us needed to. The structure was set. The load was positioned. The inspection was about to begin. I stepped out of the tree line and walked toward the platform. The sky behind me had turned entirely iron. At 8 o'clock, I stepped onto the platform. The microphone was already live. I could hear my own breathing return to me through the speaker system with a half-second delay. The way an echo returns from the far wall of a canyon. 453 people sat in curved rows beneath the white tent. The wildflowers trembled in a breeze that smelled like rain. Beyond the tent, the sky was the color of wet slate, and the first distant flash of lightning lit the ridgeline without sound. The storm was still miles away. It would arrive later. It would not be needed. I placed both hands on the podium. I did not greet the audience. I did not thank them for coming. I did not mention the bridge project, or the park, or the county commissioners in the second row. I looked at the cardboard box on the table beside me and I began. 7 months ago, on Christmas Eve, I came home to find a box like this one on my doorstep. Inside were my clothes, my passport, and an envelope containing documents that told me my house had been sold. My marriage was over, and I owed $420,000 to a company I had never heard of. The tent was silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting for a punchline. The structural silence of a room in which every person has stopped breathing at the same interval. Tonight I am going to show you how that box was built. Who designed it? Who funded it? And who signed the permits? Claire pressed the wireless remote. Behind me, the gray curtain parted and the first screen rolled forward. 75 inches of light, filled with numbers, dates, and corporate filings. Screen 1, I said. Reed Chambers Development, LLC. Filed in Delaware. Filed in Delaware. On March 7th. 3 years ago. Signatory, Denise Kathleen Reed, using a durable power of attorney I signed for medical emergencies and never intended for financial use. This LLC opened a commercial line of credit, totaling $420,000, secured by my professional license, my retirement account, and the equity in my home at 41 Birchwood Lane. 14 drawdowns over 16 months. Every dollar moved through 4 layers of shell companies. Every layer designed to make the money disappear before I noticed it was gone. I paused. In row 12, Denise sat motionless. Her hands were in her lap. Her face held the expression of someone watching a building she lives in begin to tilt. Claire pressed the remote again. The second screen rolled forward. 214 photographs appeared in a grid, timestamps, and GPS coordinates, visible in the lower corner of each image. Screen 2, I said. 9 months of photographic surveillance. Meetings between the co-conspirators. Document signings. Cash exchanges. Each image dated, geotagged, and verified by an independent forensic examiner. You are looking at the construction log of a fraud that took 27 years to design and 7 months to expose. In row 3, Richard Chambers uncrossed his legs, crossed them again, and placed his right hand on the armrest. His fingers pressed into the metal. I recognized the gesture. It is the same motion a man makes when he grips a railing on a structure he suddenly realizes is not rated for the weight he is standing on. The third screen rolled forward without my prompting. Claire had timed it. The display showed a single document enlarged to fill the entire 75 inches. Desert, Mountain, Clinical, Diagnostics. Phoenix, Arizona. Patient name, Olivia Denise Reed. Probability of paternity 99.97%. Alleged father, Richard Allen Chambers. I did not narrate the screen. I let it stand. 453 people read the document in silence. In row 7, Olivia's hand moved to her mouth. She already knew the contents. She had ordered the test herself. But seeing it displayed at this scale, in front of this many witnesses, was a different kind of knowing. It was the difference between a crack in a private wall and a crack projected onto a building visible from every street in town. "Screen 4, I said. Claire brought the final display forward. The Reed Family Legacy Trust. $91 million in assets. 14 properties across 4 states. 3 active mining leases. Created 9 years ago by George Allen Reed. Sole beneficiary Martin James Reed." Beside the trust summary, a confirmation letter from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division acknowledging receipt of a formal referral regarding undeclared foreign income, wire fraud, and tax evasion attributed to Richard Allen Chambers, total undeclared amount $1.4 million routed through a Cayman Islands intermediary. "Mr. Chambers," I said, looking directly at row 3. Richard's face had passed through red and arrived at a color I would describe as structural gray, the color of a material that has exceeded its yield point. "7 months ago, you purchased my house from my wife using a forged power of attorney. You created a debt in my name. You took my home, my credit, and my daughter's trust in me." I reached over and placed my hand on the cardboard box. "This box sat on my doorstep on Christmas Eve. You designed it as a coffin. But I am an engineer, Mr. Chambers, and I read structures for a living. So I opened it. I studied the joints. I traced the load path. And I followed it back to you." I lifted the lid of the box. Inside were 453 white envelopes, each containing a single-page summary of the financial fraud, the DNA finding, and the federal referrals. Claire stood, walked to the first row, and began distributing them hand by hand, row by row, with the calm efficiency of a photographer handing out prints at an exhibition. "Every person in this tent now holds the same evidence that has been filed with federal authorities," I said. "Every person in this tent is a witness." I looked at Richard. I looked at Denise. I looked at Olivia. Then I leaned into the microphone and said the sentence I had carried in my chest for 7 months. The sentence I had built one word at a time, the way a man builds a bridge, one beam at a time, tested and measured and torqued to specification. "I own what you owe." The first crack of thunder arrived from the west. The wildflowers shook. The 4 screens glowed behind me like windows into a building that could no longer hide its blueprint. And 453 people sat in the silence that follows the moment a structure reveals what it was built to conceal. The VIP staging room was a prefabricated structure behind the main tent, 20 feet by 14 feet, with one entrance, no windows, and a portable air conditioning unit that hummed at a frequency I estimated at 60 hertz. Jack had selected this room for its geometry. One door meant one point of control. No windows meant no secondary exit. The air conditioning meant ambient noise that would mask conversation from anyone standing outside. But Jack's internal microphone, mounted beneath the folding table, would capture every syllable. On the table sat a cardboard box. Same manufacturer, same corrugated weight, same brown finish. This one was empty. I had placed it there at 5:15. 3 hours before the presentation, and left the lid open so that anyone entering the room would see the hollow interior immediately. An empty box is not a threat. It is a question, and questions are harder to walk away from than accusations. At 8:32, Jack opened the door and escorted Richard Chambers inside. Richard's jacket was unbuttoned. His phone was in his left hand, screen dark, held the way a man holds a weapon he has not yet decided to use. He saw the box. He looked at me. He did not sit. "This is actionable, Martin," he said. His voice carried the controlled register of a man accustomed to boardrooms, but the pitch was a quarter tone higher than I remembered. Stress raises pitch. I had learned that from Claire's audio analysis notes. Every word you said out there is defamation. My attorneys will have a filing by Monday morning. Your attorneys will be busy Monday morning, Donna Kessler said from the corner chair, where she had been sitting since 8 o'clock with a legal pad and a pen she had not uncapped. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division does not wait for civil filings, Mr. Chambers. Neither does the FBI. Richard looked at Donna. He looked at the box. He placed his phone face down on the table and sat. At 8:35, Jack brought Denise. She entered the room and stopped 2 steps past the threshold. Her eyes moved from me to the box, to Richard, to Donna, and back to the box. She did not speak. She sat in the chair farthest from Richard, which placed her directly across from me. The distance between us was 6 feet. The closest we had been since Christmas Eve. "Martin," she said. Just the name. No sentence attached. The word hung in the air-conditioned hum, like a single note played on an instrument that no longer had strings. At 8:37, Olivia arrived. She entered fast, heels striking the plywood floor, and stood between her mother and Richard without sitting. Her arms were crossed. Her jaw was set. She looked at the empty box, and then at me, with an expression I had seen once before, on the face of a contractor who had been told his foundation pour had failed inspection. Not anger. Not shame. The expression of someone who knows the numbers are correct and has no counter-argument left. "Sit down, Olivia," I said. She sat. The room held 5 people and 1 empty box. Jack stood outside the closed door. The air conditioning hummed. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was small enough that a whisper would reach every wall. "I am not here to argue," I said. "The evidence has been filed. The witnesses have their copies. The federal agencies have their referrals. None of that changes based on what happens in this room." I placed my hand on the edge of the open box. "This box is empty because everything that was taken from me has been recovered. The debt is held by the trust. The mortgage is under new management. The evidence is distributed. There is nothing left inside this box for any of you to take." Richard leaned forward. "What do you want, Martin?" "I want you to understand something," I said. "For 27 years, I built structures that hold weight. Bridges, overpasses, retaining walls. I built them correctly because I understood that other people's lives depended on the integrity of my work. You built a different kind of structure. Yours was designed to collapse. It was designed to fall on me and leave you standing. But you made a mistake that every bad engineer makes. You forgot to account for the ground." I looked at Denise. "The ground was the family you thought you controlled. The letters you intercepted. The father you told me was dead. The daughter you thought you erased." The door opened. Claire stepped in. She wore the blue denim jacket. The camera pin caught the overhead light. She carried nothing in her hands. She stood beside my chair and looked at Denise, with an expression that held no anger, no satisfaction, and no request for permission. "I found Grandpa through a bridge permit in Fayette County," Claire said. Her voice was level, professional, the same tone she had used at Cedar Ridge Diner, but with a layer beneath it that was older and heavier, the layer that forms when a person has waited years to say something and has rehearsed it so many times that the words arrive without effort. "I spent 9 months collecting what you spent 27 years hiding. I sat in parked cars outside restaurants. I recorded conversations through walls. I photographed every meeting, every handshake, every envelope. I did it because you took my father from me when I was 4 years old, and I decided that I would be the one to give him back." Denise closed her eyes. Not a blink. A closing. The kind that happens when a structure settles and the last supporting wall accepts the full weight it was never designed to carry alone. Olivia turned to Richard. "Did you know," she said, "about me before the test?" Richard said nothing. His silence was the loudest sound in the room. It was the sound of a beam that has reached its ultimate tensile strength and has nothing left to give. I reached into my jacket and placed a single item on the table beside the empty box. A bus ticket. Greyhound. Charlotte to Iron Creek. One way. Purchased that morning. It was not for anyone in particular. It was a symbol. The same mode of transportation I would have been forced to take 7 months ago when my cards were declined and my cash was running out. The cheapest ticket in America. The last option of a man with no options. This is what you left me with, I said. A box and a bus ticket. I want you to look at them both. And remember that I came back anyway. I stood. Claire stood. We walked to the door. Jack opened it from the outside. The night air hit my face. Warm and electric. Smelling of rain that had not yet fallen. Behind us, in the room with no exit, 3 people sat with an empty box and a bus ticket, and the sound of an air conditioning unit that would run all night whether anyone was inside or not. The storm that had threatened all evening arrived at 9:14, 20 minutes after Claire and I stepped out of the VIP room. Rain fell on the tent in sheets so heavy the catering staff abandoned the dessert tables and stood under the overhang watching water run across the gravel lot in brown rivers. By 10 o'clock, the tent was empty. By midnight, the crew had begun disassembly. By morning, the east bank of the new river looked the way it had looked before we arrived. Raw earth and river stone. And the faint impressions of 453 chairs pressed into grass that would recover within a week. The legal consequences took longer. In August, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division opened a formal case against Richard Allen Chambers. In September, a federal grand jury in the Southern District of West Virginia returned a sealed indictment on 3 counts of tax evasion, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud. Richard's passport was surrendered. His brokerage accounts were frozen. The assets of Blue Ridge Land Partners, LLC, including 72 acres in McDowell County, were placed under federal seizure pending forfeiture proceedings. His attorneys filed 4 motions to dismiss. All 4 were denied. Donna Kessler handled the civil side with the same precision she applied to every document that crossed her desk. In October, the Reed Family Legacy Trust initiated foreclosure proceedings on 41 Birchwood Lane after Richard missed 2 consecutive mortgage payments. The house I had lived in for 23 years. The house where I had built a deck and planted a dogwood tree and carried Claire on my shoulders through the front door when she was 4, went to auction on November 12th. It sold for $387,000. The buyer was a young couple from Asheville who planned to raise their children there. I did not attend the auction. Claire told me the dogwood was still standing. Of the $387,000, Donna allocated $97,000 to cover trust administration costs, legal fees, and Alan Pryor's forensic accounting bill. The remaining $290,000 was transferred to 3 organizations. The Fayette County Community Foundation received $100,000 for a scholarship fund in George Reed's name, designated for first-generation engineering students. The Iron Creek Volunteer Fire Department received $90,000 for a new emergency vehicle. The Charlotte Area Crisis Housing Fund received $100,000 for families facing wrongful eviction. I signed the transfer documents on a Tuesday afternoon in George's office. Claire witnessed. George stood by the window and looked at the valley and said nothing, which was his way of saying everything. There was one remaining financial matter. Denise's personal liability. Alan's forensic work had traced $148,000 of the original $420,000 debt directly to expenditures made by Denise under the fraudulent LLC. Clothing, travel, a kitchen renovation, a car lease. These were not Richard's transactions. They were hers. The trust held the legal right to pursue recovery of every dollar. I chose not to. Donna prepared a formal waiver, releasing Denise Kathleen Reed from all financial obligations to the Reed Family Legacy Trust in the amount of $148,000. I signed it on the same Tuesday. When Donna asked if I wanted to include a statement or a letter, I said no. The waiver was the statement. It said what I could not say in the VIP room, and what I would not say to her face. It said that 27 years could not be reduced to a number, and that I refused to become the kind of man who tries. In December, I drove to Charlotte one last time. Not to the house, to the street. I parked across from 41 Birchwood Lane at 7 in the morning and sat in the truck with the engine off. The new owners had hung a wreath on the front door. The dogwood was bare. its branches dark and precise against the winter sky like a drawing made with a single pen. The deck I had built still held its original railing. The mailbox still leaned 2 degrees to the left, a flaw I had noticed 14 years ago and never corrected because Denise said it gave the house character. I did not get out of the truck. I did not need to. I was not there to reclaim anything. I was there to confirm that the structure had passed to someone who would maintain it. The wreath was enough. On the drive back, I passed through a small town east of Beckley and stopped for gas. While the tank filled, I looked across the road and saw a Greyhound bus idling at a shelter. A woman stood beside it with a single suitcase, waiting to board. She was not Olivia, but for a moment, in the flat winter light, she could have been. Donna had informed me in November that Olivia had left Charlotte. She had closed her apartment at the Metropolitan, withdrawn from the holding company, and moved to a city Donna did not name. She did not contest the trust. She did not contact me. She boarded a bus of her own, choosing, and went somewhere I would not follow. I thought about the bus ticket I had placed on the table in the VIP room. One way, Charlotte to Iron Creek. I had meant it as a mirror, a reflection of what they had reduced me to. But standing at that gas station, watching a stranger board a bus with everything she owned in one suitcase, I realized the mirror faced both directions. A bus ticket is not only a symbol of what a person loses, it is also a symbol of what a person decides to carry when they leave. In January, 5 months after the gala, I returned to Iron Creek. The cabin on the western slope was still mine. The wood stove still worked. The creek still ran beneath the footbridge where George had carved his initials 24 years ago. The town had not changed. The diner still served the same coffee. Mrs. Hadley still rented the room above the hardware store to travelers who arrived without reservations. The foreman at the commercial site still left technical questions on my desk every morning. And every morning I answered them before the crew arrived at 7. The difference was that I no longer answered them alone. On the first Saturday of February, 1 year and 6 weeks after Christmas Eve, I sat at the drafting table George had built for me in the second-floor office of the mill. The table was old-growth oak, 8 feet long, angled at 12 degrees, with a brass rail along the lower edge to keep drawings from sliding. It had been George's table before it was mine. The surface was scarred with decades of pencil marks and compass points, and the faint coffee rings of a man who worked before dawn and stopped after dark. I had added my own marks over the past 5 months. They were lighter than his. I was still learning the pressure. The morning light came through the east window in a single column that moved across the floor at a rate I had calculated during my first week. 7 inches per hour. By 8 o'clock, the light would reach the table. By 9, it would cross the brass rail. By 10, it would disappear behind the filing cabinets, and the room would return to the cool fluorescent tone of a working office. I preferred the hour between 8 and 9, when the natural light and the artificial light overlapped, and every line on the paper carried 2 shadows. Claire arrived at 7:45. She carried 2 coffees from the diner, the same order she had placed every Saturday morning since October. Black for me. 1 sugar for her. She set them on the windowsill and pulled a stool to the end of the table. She did not ask what I was working on. She looked at the paper and waited. That was how she entered a room. Not with questions, with presence. George arrived at 8. He climbed the stairs slowly. His knees had worsened since November, a fact he acknowledged only through the increased time between his footsteps and the quieter way he lowered himself into a chair. He sat across from me, placed his hands flat on the table edge, and looked at the drawing, the way a man looks at a letter he has been expecting for a long time. On the table lay a single sheet of architectural vellum, 24 inches by 36 inches, clipped to the oak surface with brass fasteners. The drawing was mine. I had started it in December, working in the early mornings before the crew arrived, using a mechanical pencil and a straight edge, and the set of drafting tools George had given me on my 57th birthday, a leather roll containing instruments that had belonged to his father. The drawing showed a house. Small, 1,200 square feet. Single story. A covered porch facing east. A standing seam metal roof, pitched at 4/12. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. A kitchen open to the living area, and a workspace along the north wall, with a drafting table positioned beneath a window. The house sat on a stone foundation at the edge of a river, 20 feet above the waterline, with a footpath descending through native trees to a dock where a small wooden boat was tied. There was no boat yet. There was no dock. There was no house. There was only the drawing and the land, a 2-acre parcel on the west bank of the New River that George had held in the trust for 11 years, waiting for someone to build on it. I had designed the house the way I designed every structure, starting with the ground. Soil analysis, bedrock depth, water table, flood history, then the foundation, then the frame, then the systems, then the surfaces. Each layer dependent on the one beneath it, each connection specified, each material chosen for what it could carry over time. Not the heaviest material, not the most expensive, the one that matched the load. Claire leaned forward and traced the porch line with her finger. "How many chairs?" she said. "3, I said. She nodded. She did not ask whose they were. She already knew. 3 chairs. 3 people. A father, a daughter, and a grandfather who had waited 24 years for a porch to sit on together. George reached across the table and placed one finger on the north wall of the workspace. "The window," he said. "How wide?" 6 feet, I said. "Same as yours." He looked at me. His eyes were the same pale blue they had been in the photograph from 1978. The one where he held a boy in an oversized hard hat on an unfinished bridge. The blue had faded with time, but the structure behind it had not. He tapped the window once and pulled his hand back. "Good proportion," he said. I picked up the mechanical pencil and added one final line to the drawing. A thin horizontal mark at the base of the east, facing porch, representing the finished grade where the stone foundation met the earth. It was the line where the building began. Every structure has one. The line that says, "This is where I chose to stand." I set the pencil down and rolled the vellum carefully, sliding it into the leather tube George had used for his own drawings since 1981. The tube was cracked along one seam, and the brass cap was tarnished green. It was not new. It did not need to be. It needed to hold what was inside. And it did. Claire picked up both coffees, handed me mine, and walked to the window. George stood slowly, gripped the table edge for balance, and joined her. The valley below was white with frost. The creek was a dark line cutting through it. The footbridge was visible a quarter-mile upstream, small and steady, carrying nothing and holding everything. I stood between them with the leather tube under my arm and the coffee warm in my hand. The light from the east window had reached the brass rail. In 40 minutes, it would cross the table and disappear. But for now it was here, and so were we. There is a phrase I found written in pencil on the inside cover of George's original drafting journal, dated 1963, the year he started his first project. I do not know if he wrote it or copied it from someone else. I do not know if he intended it as advice or as a reminder to himself. But I have read it enough times to know that it is true, and it is the last thing I will say before I set this story down. Stop traveling. Start arriving. If you have stayed with me this far, through the box on the doorstep, and the bridge at Iron Creek, and the 4 screens, and the empty room, and the storm that came and went, and the bus ticket that meant 2 things at once, then you already understand what those 4 words mean. They mean that the destination is not a place you reach. It is a decision you make to stop moving and to build where you are. I am building where I am. If this story moved something in you, I would be grateful if you shared it with one person who might need to hear it. And if you are still here, still listening, still reading, then you are already the kind of person who understands that the strongest structures are not the ones that never crack. They are the ones that carry weight anyway. Thank you for staying.